What should have been one of Teyana Taylor's biggest celebration nights instantly turned into a public confrontation no one saw coming. Just moments after the 2026 Oscars, a viral clip appeared to show Teyana furiously calling out a security guard, accusing him of putting his hands on her as guests were leaving the ceremony. In the middle of the chaos, her voice cut through the crowd with one message that made this story explode across social media: "Don't touch me." And that is exactly why this has become one of the hottest post-Oscars dramas of the moment, because this was not some quiet backstage misunderstanding. It happened in public, on camera, right after Hollywood's biggest night. And within hours, the fallout grew even bigger when the security company admitted there had been contact. The Academy was forced to respond, and Teyana herself later broke her silence. So what really happened in those tense seconds after the show? And why is this story hitting such a nerve so fast? The reason this story caught fire so quickly is because the video itself felt impossible to ignore. In the now viral clip, Teyana Taylor is seen visibly furious as she confronts a man she identified as security, making it clear that from her point of view, he had crossed a line in a way she was not willing to stay silent about. She repeatedly called out the fact that he was a man putting his hands on a woman, and that detail instantly changed the tone of the moment from ordinary post-event confusion to something much more serious and emotionally charged. What made the footage so powerful was not just the argument itself, but the setting around it. This was happening as guests were leaving the Oscars, in the middle of the crowded, chaotic energy that follows Hollywood's biggest night, when cameras are still rolling, people are still watching, and every reaction becomes magnified. That is exactly why the clip spread so fast. It did not feel like a private misunderstanding that happened off to the side. It felt like a raw, public confrontation unfolding in real time, with Teyana refusing to let the moment pass quietly. And once people saw how intense her reaction was, the internet immediately started asking the same question: what happened in those few seconds before the cameras caught this? That uncertainty made the drama even more addictive, because viewers were not just reacting to a celebrity being upset, they were trying to fill in the missing pieces of a moment that already looked explosive on screen. Instead of fading away as a random red carpet scuffle, this became a full entertainment headline because the clip felt emotional, direct, and unsettling enough to make people debate whether this was an overreaction, a security failure, or proof that something deeply disrespectful had just happened in plain sight.
What pushed this story beyond simple social media outrage was the fact that the security company did not come out and completely deny that something had happened. Instead, the company responsible for Oscar's security acknowledged that there had been a brief interaction and described it as incidental contact, while also admitting that the situation escalated beyond the level of professionalism they expect from their staff. And that detail changed everything. The moment an official company statement entered the conversation, this stopped feeling like just another celebrity incident being exaggerated online. It suddenly carried much more weight because now there was confirmation that there had, in fact, been physical contact of some kind, and that the situation was serious enough to trigger internal action afterward. For viewers watching this unfold, that became the turning point. Up to that moment, some people may have assumed the clip was being blown out of proportion by social media, or that Teyana's anger was simply the result of a tense, crowded exit after a long awards show. But once the company itself admitted the encounter crossed a professional line, it became much harder to dismiss her reaction as meaningless drama. In fact, that response may have fueled the controversy even more, because it left the public in a strange middle ground. The company did not frame the moment in the same exact language Teyana used, but it also did not clear its employee in a way that would shut the story down. And when a statement lands in that gray area, the audience almost always fills in the rest with even more suspicion. That is why this part of the story matters so much. It transformed the narrative from a viral emotional outburst into a real controversy with official consequences. At that point, people were no longer just asking whether Teyana Taylor had overreacted. They were asking something much bigger. If this was only a minor crowd control mistake, why did the company feel the need to admit fault, acknowledge professionalism concerns, and handle the matter internally so quickly? And once that question entered the conversation, the drama became much harder for anyone to contain. If the security company's statement made the story bigger, the Academy's response made it impossible to brush aside. Once the organization behind the Oscars publicly said it was extremely upset over what Teyana Taylor experienced, the incident stopped looking like a minor post-show misunderstanding and started feeling like a real failure on one of Hollywood's most carefully controlled nights. The Academy made it clear that even though the security team came from an outside company, the experience of every guest still reflects on the Oscars itself. That detail is huge because it shows just how seriously they believe this moment should be taken. They also called the behavior unacceptable and even praised Teyana for staying composed under pressure, which only fueled even more conversation online. At that point, the story was no longer just about a celebrity clashing with security. It had turned into a much bigger conversation about respect, boundaries, and how someone could end up feeling unsafe or humiliated at the very event meant to celebrate them.
What makes this story even more fascinating is that Teyana Taylor did not appear interested in turning this into a never-ending public war. After the clip exploded and headlines started racing across social media, she later spoke in a way that seemed designed to lower the temperature, suggesting that everything was fine and making it sound as if people were simply doing too much in a hectic moment. On paper, that should have been the point where the story began to fade. Normally, when the person at the center of the controversy signals that they are ready to move on, the public gradually follows. But this situation had already gone too far in the public eye for that to happen so easily. By then, the incident was no longer living only in Teyana's own reaction. It had already become a viral clip, a media headline, a public debate, and an Oscars controversy tied to official statements from both the security company and the Academy itself. That is why her attempt to calm things down actually made the story more interesting rather than less. It created a tension at the center of the narrative. On one side, Teyana seemed to be saying she was not going to let this ruin her night or keep feeding the drama. But on the other side, she still made it clear that she does not tolerate disrespect, and that message kept the emotional truth of the moment alive. She may have softened the aftermath, but she did not erase the reason people were upset in the first place. And that contradiction is exactly what kept audiences hooked. Because once viewers saw her visibly angry in the clip, heard the official responses that followed, and then watched her publicly downshift the tone, the whole story started to feel bigger than just one confrontation. It became about what happens when a celebrity tries to take back control of a moment that has already escaped into the public. In a way, Teyana's calmer follow-up may have made the drama feel even more real, because it suggested she was trying to rise above it while the internet was still dissecting every second. And that is why the damage was already done. Even if she wanted to move forward, the image of her confronting security after Hollywood's biggest night had already become the version of the evening many people would remember most. What should have been a clean, glamorous post-Oscars victory lap had already been rewritten into something much messier. A celebration interrupted by a moment of anger, discomfort, and public scrutiny that no later statement could fully undo. In the end, this story exploded because it had every ingredient that keeps Hollywood drama alive long after the red carpet is over. A major star, a viral confrontation, a raw emotional reaction, and official responses that made the situation feel even more serious instead of less. Teyana Taylor was supposed to be leaving one of the biggest nights of her career, stepping out of the Oscars with the kind of glow, attention, and momentum that stars wait years to experience. That alone is what makes this story so compelling. The contrast is impossible to ignore. One moment, this is the glamour, prestige, and triumph of Hollywood's most celebrated event. The next, it becomes a chaotic public clash that completely changes the emotional memory of the night. And that kind of contrast is exactly what audiences latch onto. People are always drawn to the moment when a polished, glamorous image suddenly cracks and reveals something tense, human, and uncomfortable underneath. But what truly kept this story hot was that it did not stay in the category of random celebrity drama. It quickly turned into a bigger conversation about respect, boundaries, and the treatment of women even in the most elite spaces. Once viewers saw Teyana's reaction, heard the security company acknowledge contact, and watched the Academy publicly express outrage over her experience, the whole situation started to feel symbolic of something larger than one brief altercation. That is why it kept spreading. It was no longer just about whether there was an argument. It was about what that argument seemed to represent. Even Teyana's effort to calm things down could not fully shut that conversation off, because by then, the internet had already attached meaning to the moment. And when a story reaches that point, it stops belonging only to the people involved. It becomes part of the larger pop culture narrative. That is exactly what happened here. This was supposed to be an Oscar night remembered for achievement, elegance, and celebration. Instead, for many people, one of the most unforgettable images from the aftermath became Teyana Taylor standing her ground and refusing to stay silent. That is why this became the hottest post-Oscars drama of the moment, not because it was the loudest scandal in Hollywood history, but because it struck a nerve so quickly and exposed how fast a night of glamour can turn into a headline about conflict, disrespect, and public fallout. And even if the headlines eventually cool down, this may still be the moment many viewers remember when they think back on the aftermath of the 2026 Oscars, because the glamour of the event was suddenly overshadowed by a confrontation that felt far too real to ignore.